All right, let's get started. Let me turn it. So, quickly to introduce myself, my name is Amit Anthony Alex. As I said, I've been in sort of the social impact sector for over 15 years. I've done various roles ranging from working for a social enterprise to an intermediary organization to being a grant manager, and my last role as the country director for Upaya Social Ventures, which was an impact investment firm that invested in early stage startups that focused on livelihood. So that's sort of a quick background about myself. Let me also just hand it over to CK to introduce himself, and then we can set some expectations and ground rules as well. CK, over to you.
Thanks, Amit. So hi, I'm Chandrakant. I have been in the social impact space for now over 12 years. Like Amit, various roles working to build social enterprises, different sectors, agriculture, renewable energy, education. And over the last 9 years, I've been with intermediary sort of organization that supports businesses across different geographies, also playing a fund manager role because the company that, so for the last around 3.5 years, I've been heading an event here in India, sort of designing ecosystem projects that sort of support social enterprises in the impact space. So looking forward to sort of sharing a few more sort of information over the course of the next hour. Back to you, Amit.
Thanks, CK. So just to set some expectations, this webinar is aimed at young people, especially those who are interested in starting to have a career in the social sector, or people who are already, let's say, studying or graduated. It could also be useful for people who are just starting their career. So we will be covering a lot of information, but from sort of a high level point of view. If you have any questions during the course of the webinar, just keep typing it down in the chat window. I know some of you had submitted some of the questions when you registered as well. We will try and touch base upon them during the course of the webinar, and we can pick up a few at the end of the webinar as well. So that's it. I'm going to just turn off my camera. It'll be easier for everyone to just concentrate on the presentation than my face as we go through the presentation. Great. CK, do you want to start with just talking about path builders?
Yeah, sure. So building on what Amit said, basically what Amit and I have been discussing for a while on, because we've been in the impact space, have been working here and share sort of value systems and what we wanted to do and assist. And we wanted to see how else we could sort of support the ecosystem of the social impact space. And so we decided we want to sort of start something together, and that's what we're calling the Path Builders, and this is our first webinar. The vision of Path Builder, as all of you could read, is basically to help create an equitable, invulnerable, and compassionate world. So because the impact space works across the triple bottom line, which is social, environmental, economic impact, and so Path Builder is looking to sort of support that ecosystem. And the purpose is, how do you do it? It's geared towards young people that are just graduating, wanting to see how their careers will shape up, and so how can we empower them to take action so that they can live a career that is more purposeful. And in order to do that, we wanted to sort of help mobilize, but also equip with knowledge, with tools, the young people, so that they can sort of redefine tomorrow, but also what careers they could work on in the coming as they graduate. What we do, and that's what we'll talk about a bit more in the next slide, is basically around providing the necessary information built from years of experience from Amit and myself, but also experts, and so that they can kickstart, learn from maybe our mistakes, learn from what we've been through. Amit, over to the next slide. Yeah, thanks. So, as I said, at the core center of sort of agenda of Path Builder is to help young people lead, embark on a sort of purposeful career. And right now, we're starting off, well, as part of that information resources. What you'll hear over the next hour is about an overview of this impact space. But in the coming weeks and months, we are going to be kickstarting and launching a few other sort of services and tools that we would like to provide, from networking opportunities, from very bespoke career counseling, workshops where you could interact and build a community of other young professionals, at not just at a local level, but also at a national level. Next slide, Amit. Yeah, thanks. So as I said, in trying to provide the information resources, there are sort of 5 areas that Path Builders would be covering. The webinar, this is one of them. This is more a general information session. In the subsequent webinars, we would be bringing other industry experts to talk about their journey, but also talk about specific areas that they work on, so that young people can get an in-depth insight into the social impact space and the work that happens here. Podcasts are sort of people that could download and listen to expert interviews, practitioner interviews, also giving an insider overview. Something I think some of you, or most of you, or all of you have already been receiving from us, weekly job digest of opportunities that exist. So it's not just a job digest, but also has volunteer and internship opportunities for candidates that have 0 to 3 years of experience to maybe test the waters in the social impact space. And the 4th and the 5th is around a series of articles about what's happening in the social impact space, how do you navigate the social impact, like working in the social impact space, and any news information that we think is relevant, and what's probably upcoming in the coming weeks to months. So those are sort of some of the resources that Path Builder intends to provide over the coming, hopefully, weeks, months, and years. Amit, over back to you.
Sure, thanks. So just to walk everyone through a quick agenda, we'll be covering primarily 2 areas. One is what is the social impact sector, right? We hear about NGOs, we hear about social enterprises, we hear about development sector. But what is the social impact sector? I'll be walking you through how Path Builder sees that. And then we'll do what is known as a sector landscape, where we've categorized various organizations into buckets based on what they do, and so that you get sort of at least sort of a map of how we see the social impact sector. Then we will be talking about career opportunities for freshers in the sector. We can talk about some of the basic skills at a fresher level opportunities, what companies and organizations look for, and based on some of the questions that have come in, what sort of the salary range that you can expect as well. And then we'll keep about 15 minutes towards the end for Q&A. We'll be covering a lot of information, so if anybody has any questions, just keep typing it down into the chat box so we can pick it up right after the 2 main agenda items. So what is the social impact sector, right? So we've sort of termed it or defined it as the entire universe that covers sort of the social sector. This includes everything from NGOs, development organizations, social enterprises, CSR funding organizations, etc. How we sort of differentiate them to, let's say, an Amazon, Reliance, which is sort of known like a for-profit company as compared to a social impact company, is organizations that prioritize their work to create impact. We could be meeting a local or a community need where they consciously, sustainably, and systematically try to address it. And we sort of gauge them on a scale between profit versus impact. NGOs, which are non-profit organizations, tend to be more focused on impact, whereas if you see social enterprises, which is for-profit businesses, try to create sort of that balance between creating profit and impact. So that's how we define sort of the social impact sector. Just to give you a map or an overview map, this is how we see it. In this, how we have sort of defined it is on the bottom of the infographic, you see social enterprises and NGOs. These are organizations that work on the ground. They are the grassroots level organizations, right? Then the second tier that you see, consulting organizations, M&E, think tanks, intermediary organizations, are providing some kind of a support service either to the top or the bottom. And the top tier is mostly investors, funders, or organizations that are doing sort of large-scale projects. So that's how we see the social impact sector. We will now be going through each of these buckets. I will now hand it over to CK to start with NGOs.
Thanks, Amit. I think probably the most familiar set of social impact organizations happen to be the NGOs. As all of you could read, there's a large pool of them just in India, over 3 million. They are at various sizes, so you have really large NGOs, some of them like Pratham and Smile Foundation or CARE, that are also not just large Indian organizations or parts of international organizations that work here in India, and you have really tiny organizations that work at a hyper-local level in helping implement and create impact. NGOs tend to work at the implementation level. Their funding is primarily from donations, from grants, or other sort of philanthropic organizations. They are registered either as trust societies, as Section 8 companies, and for the most part, NGOs are also sector specific. Very rarely are NGOs a bit more sector agnostic, so you have Pradham working on education, CARE working on young people and sort of health and a few issues related to that. You have HelpAge India that works on elderly care, and so you have different sort of organizations working on very specific thematic areas from education, sanitation, and livelihoods at a grassroots level in trying to create that impact. So that's sort of one group of organizations that work within the social impact space. Amit, next slide. Thanks. So the other area that I guess Amit and I have also spent a lot of time working with or supporting and consulting with are the organizations that are working at the local level but are structured as a for-profit entity. But the reason being because they're also committed towards ensuring that there's a self-sustainable aspect to their financial sort of survival. So a social enterprise can be many different things. They could be proprietorship, they could be partnerships, they could be private limited, but they sort of take on the sort of the business model of sort of ensuring that products and services are provided to a consumer base, a market that is willing to pay for their products and services. Funding again is very diverse. Impact investors tend to invest either in the form of equity or debt. In the early stage of for-profit entity, they might get grants and donations and do sort of consulting engagements with other family offices and philanthropic organizations. And there's a plethora of social enterprises that work in India. You have energy companies like Pollinate, you have waste management companies like Hasrudala or Sahas, you have healthcare companies like Karma Healthcare or ERC, you have governance companies that work with local governments like Haktarshak. So it's quite diverse among what social enterprises can be. Next slide. Thanks. So the next layer of sort of the ecosystem are those that provide the funding and social impact investors. Sorry, give me one second. Social impact investors, they can be individually driven or they can be driven by family offices or philanthropic organizations. Their primary objective, while ensuring financial returns, but is also a social angle, social impact. They are again, there are funds that are a bit more agnostic. So my own organization that is a bit more agnostic, that looks at that looks at waste management, healthcare, education, livelihoods, and there are others that are a bit more focused towards agri or healthcare specific, and fintech or technology specific, and you have organizations that provide a diverse range of funding. So you have the early angel impact investors all the way up to Series A, B, C, D. That is the millions of dollars of rounds of investments that happen. And you have locally based, locally run impact funds like Ankur Capital, but you also have international funds that sort of have a foothold within the country that invest in Indian social businesses. And the teams also very dependent on the scale of their investments, but usually they are quite lean run organizations with specific analysts, and I will talk a bit more about the kinds of roles that tend to be available.
Great. Yeah, thanks again. So the next category is we've classified as international foundations or NGOs. These are organizations that tend to be large. They tend to work across multiple countries, have an international scope, and they have a focus on, let's say, a specific issue or a sector. They tend to, for me, fall under three categories. They can be the advocacy kind, which aims at influencing policy making around a specific cause or a goal. Then there are large operational NGOs that implement projects across multiple countries. So, for example, Save the Children, WWF, Greenpeace, PETA are good examples of that. Then there are large sort of international foundations that do a lot of funding around socially relevant projects. The very well-known ones, obviously, are the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, for example. Some of these also, they do cross-functional roles as well. Some of the operational NGOs like Mercy Corp tends to do funding as well, depending on what is the kind of work in which country they work in. And as I said earlier, they can work across multiple segments, but most of them have a very specific focus area. So let's say, international NGOs that work around refugees tend to work around specifically the cause of refugees, right? In terms of team size, they can vary. Some of them have large teams in countries, especially the NGOs that have operations on ground, whereas the advocacy and state funding organizations tend to have smaller teams. Moving on the monitoring and evaluation category, we've added this because there is a large universe out there, organizations, especially in the social impact space, that looking at data, analyzing data to help improve efficiency, to make better decisions. They work with different stakeholders in the social impact space, ranging from corporates to NGOs to social enterprises, helping them evaluate, monitor, track progress of different projects. They can be both international organizations like 60 Decibel, JPAL, IDSite. These are big organizations that have done fascinating work, or smaller sort of Indian organizations like Fourth Wheel, Outline India, which is an upcoming M&E firm that's doing some fantastic work as well. And they tend to have, depending on organizations, teams, small teams to large teams. A lot of individuals also end up being consultants, individual consultants who do M&E within this space. Moving on, the other category that we have identified is what is known as think tanks and academia. Think tanks are, I would say, policy institutions or research institutions that does in-depth research on specific topics. The idea being topics around social and economic issues or topics, primarily aimed at helping guide policy making. Most think tanks are non-governmental organizations. They're structured as not-for-profit and will rely on grants for their funding. We've also put academic institutions into this. Academic institutions play two roles. One, they act as research organizations as well, but they also act as a pipeline, teaching courses specifically targeted for the social impact, or the social sector as we call it. TIS, ISDM, Madras School of Social Work are famous ones. Think tanks also, there are quite a few, both international and local, operating in India. Next category is consultancy and advisory. See, I don't remember if I was supposed to take this or you.
I think it was you.
Okay. So I'll continue. So consulting and advisory organizations, this category are primarily management consulting firms. So imagine the McKinseys and the BCG of the world, but the ones specifically focused in the social sector. They provide technical assistance, strategy development, training services to various stakeholders within the social impact space. Some can have very specific focus. For example, IDEO specifically looks at human-centered design. So they would take any problem, take a human-centered design approach to find a solution. There are organizations like Samagra that looks at primarily only consulting around governance. Dahlberg, another well-known firm in this space, does a lot of strategic consulting, for example. The teams tend to range from, I would say, about 5 to 50 people, depending on the size of the organization. The next category, I will hand it over to CK. And CK, if you can speak a little bit louder, that'd be great.
Sounds good. I hope this is clearer. Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, Amit. So basically, the next category of organizations are basically the governments or quasi-government organizations like the UN agencies, the World Banks, the IFCs of this world, and these are entities of the government that work on projects that are socially driven, that are implemented by these agencies. You have, again, sectoral expertise like NSDC that works primarily on skill development, or you have the UN specific, because United Nations has very specific sort of agenda. So you have the refugees, you have the food, and you have sort of different sort of sectoral specific sort of work that happens. They drive policy. They would take on usually larger projects, unlike most of the other organizations Amit and I have been speaking about. And they also tend to have large teams that run very bureaucratic ships. So it's a different sort of beast on its own. Thanks. The next set of organizations, maybe some of you might be like, we've spoken about INGOs, we've spoken about NGOs now. Philanthropic organizations like the other two also happen to be not-for-profits. They also are usually family offices that are either community-specific or social issue-specific. And they are heavily focused on helping create impact philanthropic and also provide maybe potentially a tax incentive for the family office. But they are heavily driven by the cause. Or you can also have organizations like the Tata Trust that work across different sort of thematic areas and specifications. The teams also are quite varied. You have the larger organizations like the Tata Trust, but you also have smaller family-centric offices. Family members tend to also be members or employees of some of these organizations. So CSR, especially, maybe not everyone is aware, there was an enactment of companies that happened in 2013 that mandated that companies that, this is corporate houses that had a net worth of over 5 billion rupees or a turnover of over 10 billion rupees or a profit of 50 million rupees on an annual basis should spend 2% of their net profits on CSR, and that was a mandatory requirement that has been in place for the last 9 years within in India, which meant that a lot of corporate houses have set up sort of entities to help channel this funding to social and environmental causes, social welfare activities, and they work, again, very sector agnostic, from education, from poverty, from healthcare, from environmental sustainability. Rural development is also quite large, and this is to also help the corporate houses achieve ESG compliance. And the teams vary in sizes based on the focus areas, based on how large the corporate is and how large their CSR initiatives tend to be. The organizations that sort of play the linkage role between maybe the funders, the social enterprises, the funders, and NGOs. These are organizations that link potentially the entire ecosystem. They provide incubation support for startups. They provide crowdfunding platform. They provide other allied services like legal or marketing, media. They also happen to be membership groups like industry associations that allow for networking and market linkages. They provide a guidance to the social enterprises, these social NGOs, and other sort of corporate houses, so that the ecosystem could function much more efficiently. And this space has grown quite exponentially in the last decade that Amit and I have been in this space here in India. And they also happen to be both for-profit run intermediary organizations and not-for-profit intermediary organizations. And the number of people that sort of are also very varied depending on the initiatives, depending on the sector, the thematic areas. Yeah. And yeah, over to you, Amit, to talk more about the opportunities that exist across all these organizations.
Great. So now we're going to spend some time specifically looking at each of these categories and what are typical fresher roles, what are skills required, and what are salary ranges. Starting with NGOs, when I talk about NGOs, I'm talking mostly about organizations that are implementing projects on the ground. They tend to be grant funded, so they need to do fundraising. So definitely one of the roles that is available is around that. You start as mostly as an executive level in most NGOs. You could be a program executive where you're involved in, let's say, the implementation. You could be a field officer. So starting with, let's say, fundraising, I would say skills required would be sort of high-level thinking. I would say good communication, both written and verbal presentation skills. These are, I think, 3 key skill sets that you need to have. And you should look at this if, one, you really like to write, like to tell a story. This is the kind of role that you should be looking at within the NGO space. Then comes the sort of the program executive, field level stuff. Here, I would say people management skills, program management. You need to be very organized. You need to be able to have high level of empathy. That's the kind of skills that are required as a fresher. Then I would say there are functional roles like communication, finance. Finance is definitely one area within the NGO space that there's always a requirement given sort of high compliance requirement within that space. Again, so the skill sets that are required are functionally linked. So, as a finance person, if you're looking for a finance role, you should be either an accountant or a chartered accountant. That's the kind of people that they tend to hire. Whereas on the communication side, obviously you should have some skills around, let's say, social media to creating communication material. Just to be frank about the salary range, these are tentative ranges. There could be NGOs that pay higher, there could be NGOs that pay lower, but based on both CK and my experience, I would say these are very, very realistic salary ranges as well. On the social enterprise side, given they're for-profit businesses, most social enterprises have functional roles ranging from finance, operation, marketing, sales, usually at a junior level, depending on the organization. Again, the skill set required will be specific to the role. Social enterprises tend to pay slightly higher, I would say, than NGOs, simply because they're more sustainable, they have some source of revenue generation. The third category, which is impact funds, there's, I think, a lot of interest among young people to get into impact investing. The typical roles, I would say, fall under either an investment or a portfolio analyst level. Investment analysts tend to analyze deals or companies that come through their pipeline for potential investment. Portfolio analysts tend to work with companies. Most of the smaller funds, this role tends to be combined, and you tend to do both. A third sort of analyst level role that I think there are more opportunities coming up is around impact evaluation. Given that impact investors also need to showcase the impact that they are creating. I would say, again, from a skill set point of view, you need to be analytically really good. Yeah, I would say be an Excel ninja, be good at financial modeling, have the ability to analyze financial statement. And I would also add stakeholder management, given that, and when I talk about stakeholder management, it's about being able to interact with an entrepreneur, interact with the end beneficiary, for example, and being able to, communicate, connect with them at their level. Impact funds generally have sort of higher starting salaries compared to, let's say, social enterprises and NGOs as well. The fourth sort of category, which is the M&E space, they tend to hire people, young people or freshers at an analyst or research associate level. These are highly analytical roles. You should be very comfortable to look at, Excel sheets with thousands of lines of data. You should have reasonably good knowledge of statistical evaluation softwares. Again, most of these things are skill sets that you can easily pick up. And data visualization is the other sort of, I think, skill set that is coming into demand. Converting data into visual infographics using, say, Tableau, Google Data Studio. These are, becoming more and more popular. Moving on, looking at the international foundations, I would say most of them, as a fresher, the best way to look at opportunities is either through internship and volunteering opportunities. They tend to hire more senior people or people with experience, at least when it comes to full-time roles, like let's say an in-country coordinator, facilitator. Some of them have research associates. Very rarely have I seen a lot of opportunity for freshers within international foundations. I'm not saying that there aren't any, but they tend to be very rare. And the best way to crack or get a job in an international foundation is to start getting some work experience and identifying opportunities that you can move to within international foundations. Then the next category is think tanks and academia. The roles tend to be around, researcher, research analyst. Here, I think writing skills, ability to read and analyze large volumes of information, able to work with interdisciplinary team, ability to move from one topic to the other depending on what you're researching on. These are, key skill sets that will be required for that kind of a role. The next category, consulting and advisory, they tend to hire, I think that this is an area that there is a lot of internship opportunities. That's a really good way to crack into that space. They tend to hire at an analyst level. An associate level tend to be people with an MBA. So even if you are, you don't have an experience, but you have an MBA, there is, consulting firms that do hire. They tend to hire from, say, the tier 1 colleges, just to be very honest with everyone. Again, skill sets required, I would say, both analytical and quantitative skills. I think in consulting, you need a lot of people management skills, presentation skills. And presentation skills, I mean, ability to be, a master at making presentations. I joke that most consulting firms, 90% of the work is about putting a good presentation. Pay is quite high in this sector. Again, the ability or the opportunities available tend to be very competitive, and a number of applicants do, apply in most consulting and advisory roles. The next category, which is the government or the quasi-government, and here I'm specifically talking about, let's say, the UN-based organizations. As a fresher, most of these organizations tend to have a young professional management training program. You should go online, research on it. One of the key things that I've highlighted here is I think most of them tend to ask for knowledge beyond English of one of the official languages. So if you're young, if you're interested in working in one of these large, quasi-government organization, pick up a foreign language. They tend to pay really well, given that most of them are international posting. You tend to have a very clear career track within these organizations, but even if you want to move from these organizations, it does open up a lot of opportunity. Again, I have to mention that it is quite competitive, given that you have applicants from around the world applying for these programs. Moving on, when I look at philanthropic organizations, these are family foundations. I would say there are very limited roles. Most family foundations tend to have really small teams, especially from a fresher point of view. I cannot recall, I don't know about any roles that comes in the top of my mind, which is why I've written as not applicable. The corporate and the CSR segment is something that I think a lot of opportunity is coming up, especially at a fresher level. You tend to start off at an executive analyst, and then an area that is becoming, I think, of primary importance for any company is around ESG, right? Environment, sustainability, and governance. These are different sort of frameworks that companies use or criteria to gauge themselves. I think skill sets required are primarily sort of business and people skill sets. Start studying about ESG guidelines. I think even if you get into if you want to get into any CSR kind of role, I think knowing about ESG guidelines, knowing about different standards, SDG goals, impact evaluation, these are key sort of skills that you can pick up and then make you more attractive as a potential candidate for these roles. The last segment, in keeping time into consideration, is around sort of the intermediary organizations. This is sort of the larger universe. They tend to hire, and there again, a lot of opportunities available at an analyst associate level, depending on organizations. So for example, if you want to work with an incubator or an accelerator, you can come in as an incubation analyst. You work with startups, you work as a coordinator, maybe a mentor to some of these organizations. Let's say you're looking at legal, you come in as at an associate or an analyst level, primarily looking at different legal aspects, ranging from fundraising to incorporation, for example. Within media as well, there are opportunities for communication people, at a junior level, your ability to write, your ability to pick up stories with social significance. These are, I think, key skill set, depending on within the intermediary space, what is a subsector that you are looking at. So those are sort of the categories that we had classified in talking about different sort of fresher opportunities. I just want to call out and talk about sort of the job post. I think most of you would be receiving this. If you are not, I'm going to just paste the link that you can subscribe for these job posts. We do a compilation, and I think this week we have about at least 40 opportunities that we have shortlisted that are for freshers. And when I talk about freshers, I'm talking about 0 to 3 years of work experience. We post them on LinkedIn and send it by email. In case you want it on email, I'm just sharing that on the chat window. Good. And then just to give you a preview of in terms of what is coming up in the next 2 to 3 weeks from Path Builder, we're also starting a podcast series known as Path Breaking. This podcast series is specifically, as the name says, path-breaking in the sense, we talk to people who are in a specific sector. So if for example, the next podcast that we are presenting is in impact investing. We're talking to two analysts from Upaya Social Ventures who were fresh graduates that I hired, and then they work as analysts and a senior analyst at Upaya Social Ventures. They talk about how they went about looking for a job in impact investing, what are skill set that they now believe are critical in the role. They talk about what a day looks like for them. And they also give you some hacks in terms of how you can go about looking for your job in, let's say, the impact investing space. In 2 weeks, we will also be having our next webinar, which is around strategy for job hunting in the social impact sector as a fresher. And we will continue to provide our regular job digest on a weekly basis. So that's it from our webinar content point of view. I know we have another 10 minutes left, so if you have any questions, feel free to type it in the chat window. While you're typing it, I'm going to pick up some of the questions that was shared with us during the registration. CJ, one question to you, I think that you would be able to answer that. Given that you with InnoVent, you do kind of consulting work. One question is, do you think freshers should first get on-field experience and then work in impact consulting?
I think it helps because especially in the consulting space, you are, as I think Amit you just mentioned, is sort of supporting, advising, and working with other social enterprises. So if you work with an intermediary organization, it always helps to know or adds to your credibility if you are able to work maybe with a social enterprise or work on a project that is working on in the impact space, even if it's with an intermediary organization, because there are sort of consulting gigs that are working very close to the grassroots level at the implementation level, I think. So I would say it does more good than harm. I hope that answers. Amit, your experience?
Got it. Yeah, no, I think as a fresher, some knowledge or on-ground experience, I think, makes you stand out against somebody. I think one way to build that is maybe doing a volunteering or, what I've also seen is people who, let's say, have done Teach for India fellowship or any fellowship that gives them real on-ground experience tend to be strong candidates for these kind of impact consulting roles. Salma, we have a question from you which talks about if doing a double master's add value to one's career. See, do you want to take this?
Especially now that I'm considering that myself. I think it's very much dependent on the topic that you are picking. If it's a very specialized masters that you need to get a theoretical know-how, say legal know-how or financial know-how, that is extreme, like you need to know the theory before you're able to do the job. I think, so I would be very strategic about what masters and what topics and subject areas that you're picking, so that you are able to really gain from being in the classroom and learning in that manner. Because I've come across in my career people that have done double masters. There were people that had maybe done a very hardcore finance specific and maybe have done something else on the side that is sort of helps them do their job. And I've come across people that have not done any masters and are in leadership positions as well. So one thing I have of late come to see and more so among the people that are in the social impact space, is there are a lot of courses that individuals can take up, like certifications. So you can maybe like yeah. So maybe you do a bachelor's and then you do a master's that is maybe an MBA, or something a bit more specific than an MBA. So very finance focused, or very legal focused, or very maybe sustainability, but also not just any sustainability, either environment or social impact or something along those lines, and then do a lot of allied certification courses. So there's ESG certifications, and that sort of help an individual do their job a bit more. Yeah, and also, and I think this is probably the case because it's been now nearly a decade since I've done my master's. The masters also tend to be opportunity for people to network, and like the jobs that I have gotten since were recommendations that, like, my classmates and subsequent friends have given, and so it also serves as a pool for networking. Yeah, I hope that answers. Amit, different experience, similar experience?
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree with you. I think just having clarity in terms of why you're doing the double masters, does it add value to one's career? I think to an extent. If you're doing double masters, for me, then you're looking specifically at a specific sector or a focus area. That's when it can add value, is my short answer. Great. Another question that had come in during the registration is, like, what would be guidance you would give to an early career professional of a different field wanting to switch to impact sector? So I can start off. I changed careers. I started my career in the for-profit space and then moved. I think one, just having clarity in terms of why you want to do it. I know all of us want to make a difference, but then taking it beyond that in terms of really understanding what are you passionate about. The social impact sector can be challenging in terms of when you don't see the real impact. I'll be honest to say there is a lot of bullshit in the social impact sector as well. These are things that can really weigh you down from making you from an idealist to extremely pragmatic. My guidance, I would say, is just be clear about why you want to do it. Within the social impact sector, do as much research. So, like, we walked you through different categories. We talked about different roles. Really understanding where you think you will enjoy, you will find your purpose, and then, looking at finding that opportunity that works for you. Sia, do you want to add anything to that?
I think two things. Is if you can get a taste, I think, Amit, you mentioned this, is through a volunteering experience where you can sort of get a flavor for the space, can probably help you decide the areas under social impact, because it's so diverse for you to pick and choose where you can add value. That's one. And second, and this is something I've come across among people that are pivoting or people that are not part of the space, is adding to what you said, is it is the challenging part that you mentioned, is it isn't as slow paced. Like, it can be quite intense and quite in your face, and one has to bring that A game to be able to really do well in the space also. So it's not something just, it's not a bunch of also rants, but really intelligent people that are doing really good work. And yeah, so.
Great. Another question that had come again. I see a question from someone. The major ask in terms of skill I always come across are analytical ability and problem-solving skills. How to develop the same? I think analytical and problem-solving skills can be developed through various means, right? One is reflecting whether you really like analytical and problem-solving, right? Not everybody likes that. I would say ways to develop it could be to do courses that are highly analytical and problem-solving. So any mathematical, statistical courses tend to align towards that. CJ, do you have an answer in terms of how to develop analytical and problem-solving skills?
I think what you said academically, maybe theoretically, is doing those courses, but also maybe once you have the framework, is maybe start doing that in how an individual probably goes about maybe as basic or cliche as living one's life, like, your day-to-day activities in your own job, if you're doing something as individuals, or in your day-to-day life, if one is facing it, and sort of breaking that down and sort of into smaller manageable steps and understanding and trying to write and do. So once you have the framework that Amit mentioned, applying that framework and thought process, the scientific method, as I remember back in school we used to talk about, is really methodical thought process and writing it down on an issue as simple as something maybe in your personal life, but maybe in your professional career, whatever you're doing, or if you're a student and you're trying to do something for your club, or trying to learn a new skill, right? How do you go about it? And you break it down. So, in those are ways that one could, learning by doing is the best way, at least in my experience, of picking up these skills. Yeah.
Great.
Amit?
Yeah. No, I know we are on time. We will stop here. Thank you for being excellent audience. I have a small request. There is a survey link that if there are additional questions that we were not able to answer that you might have, there is an option in the survey form. If you can take 2 minutes, it's literally like 5 questions and you just need to click on them. It's more of a rating, feedback. That would be great. It helps us improve as well and get a better understanding in terms of how we can do better. But thank you so much. We will be having our next webinar, as I said, in a couple of weeks. We will share details of that both online and via email. CK, thank you so much for being a co-host. And everyone, have a great day.
Thanks, Amit. Have a good evening, everyone.